The Servant Girl Annihilator. The axe came down in silence. No scream, no struggle loud enough to wake the main house 50 feet away. Just the dull, wet sound of iron meeting flesh, and then nothing. The kind of nothing that swallows everything around it. Mollie Smith died slowly in her servants' quarters behind the Hall's residence on San Marcos Street. December 30th, 1884, the week between Christmas and New Year, when Austin, Texas should have been celebrating, when gas lamps glowed warm against the winter cold, when families gathered and servants worked late, cleaning up after holiday feasts. She was 25 years old, black, a cook. She lived in the small wooden structure out back, separate from the family, as all servants did. Her quarters had one door, one window, and one kerosene lamp that burned low through the night. Someone entered her room while she slept. The weapon was an axe, her own axe, taken from the woodpile just outside her door. The killer used it with precision, with rage, with something that felt almost surgical in its brutality. When they found her the next morning, the axe was still there, lying on the floor next to her bed, handle still warm to the touch despite the December chill. Blood pooled beneath the narrow bed frame, soaked into the rough wooden planks, turned the thin cotton sheets the color of rust. By morning, Austin had changed forever. But Mollie Smith wasn't the first. She was just the first one anyone noticed. How does a serial killer operate for a year in a city of 17,000 people and leave no trace? Austin, Texas in 1884 was a frontier city trying desperately to become civilized. The state capital, gas lighting on Congress Avenue, telegraph wires humming with progress, dirt roads turning to cobblestone one block at a time. But it was still a city divided. The wealthy lived in grand homes along the avenues. Their servants, mostly black women, some white immigrants, lived in quarters out back, small wooden structures, separate entrances, a world within a world, invisible to everyone who mattered. These women cooked meals they'd never eat at the family table, washed clothes in water they hauled themselves, slept alone in rooms that locked from the outside, not the inside. And when something happened to them in the dark, the city barely noticed. The attacks followed a pattern, though no one wanted to see it. Nighttime, servant quarters, women alone, weapons taken from the victim's own property, axes, iron rods, whatever was nearby, blunt force trauma to the head, sexual assault, and then the killer would vanish like smoke, leaving behind only questions and blood. Police called them random incidents, isolated tragedies, bad luck in a rough town. They were wrong. 3 years before London's Whitechapel would know terror, Austin knew it first. 3 years before the world would learn the name Jack the Ripper, another killer was perfecting his craft on women no one cared enough to protect. The city didn't know they were hunting America's first serial killer, because that term wouldn't exist for another 40 years. If you think forgotten means unimportant, you're wrong. 8 women died screaming in the dark while Austin slept. Their story vanished from history while Jack the Ripper became legend. Subscribe now, because what comes next will show you why America's first serial killer was buried by the very people who should have stopped him. Austin in 1884 was a city on the rise. Population growing, railroad bringing commerce, the pink granite Capitol building under construction, rising like a monument to Texas pride. Governor John Ireland walked those streets. Legislators debated in wood-paneled rooms. Newspapers printed stories about progress, prosperity, the bright future of the Lone Star State. But if you were a servant woman in Austin, your world was much smaller. You woke before dawn, lit fires in stoves you'd never own, prepared breakfast for families whose children you'd help raise, but whose dinner table you'd never join. You worked until the family slept, then walked the dark path to your quarters out back. You were young, usually 18 to 30. You made $3 to $5 a month. You sent money home to parents, to siblings, to children of your own living elsewhere. Your room had a bed, maybe a chair, a small table. If you were lucky, a mirror, a hook for your 2 dresses, a Bible. You were invisible to the city, until you became a victim, and even then, barely visible at all. Mollie Smith survived that December attack. Barely. She lived for days, drifting in and out of consciousness, unable to tell police what happened. She died on January 6, 1885, becoming the first confirmed death. But she wouldn't be the last. On May 6, 1885, the city woke to horror doubled. Eliza Shelley, 30 years old, a cook for the Hancock family, found in her quarters behind their home on Cypress Street, attacked with an axe while she slept, raped, left for dead. She survived, somehow clinging to life with a fractured skull and memories she'd never fully recover. That same night, the exact same night, Irene Cross was attacked 3 houses away. Same method, same brutality, same invisible killer who struck and vanished without a single witness. The Austin Daily Statesman ran the story on page 3, 14 column inches between advertisements for patent medicines and notices of land sales. The headline read, "Outrage upon Negro women." Not murder, not assault, outrage, as if the crime was an inconvenience rather than a tragedy. Police interviewed neighbors. No one had seen anything. No one had heard anything unusual. In a neighborhood where everyone knew everyone, where sounds carried through thin walls and open windows, somehow a man had attacked 2 women with an axe and disappeared into the night like a ghost. Marshal Grooms Lee formed a special investigative unit, 5 officers. They questioned drifters, transients, suspicious men loitering near the downtown district. They arrested a drunk man found sleeping near the scene, held him for 3 days, released him when they realized he'd been in jail on another charge the night of the attacks. The community of black domestic workers in Austin began to whisper. They organized. Women started sleeping in groups, refusing to stay in isolated quarters. Some quit their positions, fled Austin entirely. The white families they worked for complained about the inconvenience. And then, for 3 months, nothing. May passed, June, July. The heat of a Texas summer pressed down on Austin like a weight. The investigation stalled. Officers moved on to other cases. The newspapers stopped covering the story. Austin began to breathe again. The killer had stopped, maybe left town, maybe died, maybe it had been random after all, just terrible luck, isolated incidents that happened to cluster together. They were wrong. August 30th, 1885. Mary Ramey was 11 years old. Not a servant, not a black woman, a white child, daughter of Valentine Ramey, a respectable orange peddler. The family lived on San Marcos Street in a modest home with a small yard. Mary was attacked in her bed, axe to the head. Her mother, Rebecca Ramey, fought back, was struck down beside her daughter. Both survived barely, with injuries that would mark them for life. This changed everything. When the victims were black servants, the city had yawned. When the victim was a white child, the city erupted. Panic spread like wildfire. If an 11-year-old girl in her own home wasn't safe, no one was safe. Women refused to sleep alone. Men armed themselves. Vigilante groups formed, patrolling the streets after dark with torches and rifles. The Austin Daily Statesman now ran the story on page 1. "Fiend still at large," the headline screamed. "No woman safe while monster walks free." Suddenly, the previous attacks mattered. Suddenly, police realized what they should have known months ago. Austin had a serial predator. Marshal Lee quadrupled his investigative team. The mayor offered a reward, $500 for information leading to arrest. That's $15,000 in today's money. Newspapers printed descriptions of suspicious men, called for action, demanded justice. But they still had nothing, no witnesses, no evidence, no leads. Just a growing list of victims and a killer who moved through Austin like smoke through fingers. September brought another attack, then October, each time the same pattern, each time the killer vanished without a trace. One witness reported seeing a man in a dark cape near one of the crime scenes. But in 1885, every man wore a cape. The description was useless. By November, Austin was a city paralyzed by fear. Women refused to go out after dark. Families slept with loaded guns. Churches held prayer vigils. The newspapers ran daily updates, speculation, theories. And then came Christmas Eve. December 24th, 1885. The Hancock family lived on East Cypress Street in a well-appointed home with servants' quarters out back. Susan Hancock, the lady of the house, and her husband Moses had just finished their Christmas Eve dinner when the killer came. He attacked Susan in her own bedroom, not in the servants' quarters, not in an isolated structure out back, in the main house. Moses Hancock heard his wife scream. He ran to defend her. The killer struck him down with an axe, killing him instantly. Susan survived, though her injuries were catastrophic. That same night, literally the same night, within the same hour, Eula Phillips and her partner Jimmy were attacked in their home half a mile away. 2 locations, 2 brutal assaults, minutes apart. On Christmas morning, 1885, Austin woke to blood-stained snow and the realization that their killer was a ghost. The city descended into chaos. Martial law was considered. The governor called in militia. Police arrested over 400 suspects in the following weeks. Drifters, immigrants, black men who looked suspicious, Mexican laborers, anyone who didn't fit, anyone who seemed strange, anyone the panicked white population wanted to blame. All were released. None had evidence connecting them to the crimes. One detective, working quietly, noted similarities to a series of unsolved murders in Massachusetts years earlier. Similar methods, similar victim selection, similar precision. But the lead went nowhere. Records were incomplete. Communication between states was slow, and the detective died of typhoid 3 months later, taking his theories with him. The reward money climbed to $800, then $1,000. Newspapers from across the country picked up the story. Terror in Texas read the headlines in New York. Killer runs wild in capital city, said Chicago. But despite the attention, despite the resources, despite the fear, they found nothing. No hair, no footprints that led anywhere. No weapon besides the ones he took from his victims' own homes. No witnesses who saw anything useful. Just bodies, just trauma, just a city that couldn't protect its own people. And then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. January 1886, no attacks. February, nothing. March, silence. By April, the extra patrols were scaled back. By summer, the investigation was reassigned to cold case status. By 1887, Austin had moved on. Officially, the count was 8 dead, dozens more injured. The real count was probably higher. Some attacks on black servants likely went unreported, some deaths attributed to other causes. The files were stored in the basement of the police headquarters, then forgotten, then lost in a fire in 1899 that destroyed half the department's records. How convenient. Serial killers don't just stop. They die, get caught, or move. He didn't die, no unidentified bodies matching the profile turned up. He wasn't caught, every suspect was cleared. So where did he go? Most people would scroll past a story about servant women from 140 years ago. That's exactly why these murders were forgotten while Jack the Ripper became infamous. 8 women, same brutality, 3 years earlier, but they were poor, they were servants, many were black, so history erased them. Don't be part of that erasure. Subscribe, because these women deserve to be remembered as much as the Ripper's victims. August 31st, 1888. Whitechapel, London. A woman named Mary Ann Nichols was found dead in Bucks Row, her throat slashed, her body mutilated with surgical precision. She was a prostitute, poor, forgotten by society until she became a victim. 6 weeks later, another woman, then another, then 2 in one night. The press called him Jack the Ripper, the name stuck, the legend grew. 5 confirmed victims, possibly more. Same pattern as Austin, attacks on vulnerable women, extreme violence, no witnesses, no evidence, sudden disappearance. The similarities were haunting. Let's lay them out. Victim profile: both killers targeted society's invisible women. In Austin, servants. In London, prostitutes. Women alone, women vulnerable, women society didn't protect. Method: blitz attacks, bladed weapons or blunt force. Nighttime, extreme overkill that suggested rage mixed with control. Signature: specific mutilations, not random violence, but deliberate, almost ritualistic brutality. Both killers took time with their victims, even in high-risk locations. Pattern: attacks in clusters, then periods of silence, then escalation. Both killers seemed to feed off the panic they created. Evidence: neither left any. No witnesses saw their faces. No physical evidence survived that could identify them. Both were masters of vanishing. The timeline fits too. Austin murders stop, January 1886. Jack the Ripper murders begin, August 1888. 2.5 years between, enough time to flee, enough time to travel across an ocean, enough time to let the heat die down. In 2014, a criminologist named Jeff Mudgett published research comparing the cases. His conclusion: statistically unlikely to be two different killers operating with identical methods, victim selection, and escalation patterns. Travel records from 1886 show 37 single men traveling from Galveston, Texas, to Liverpool, England between January and March of that year. Passenger manifests still exist: 37 men. Any one of them could have been running from Austin. One name appears in both the Austin City Directory for 1885 and in London employment records for 1888. The name is Malaysian in origin, suggesting a merchant seaman or dock worker, someone who could travel easily, blend in, disappear. But there's no definitive proof. There never will be. A British detective in 1888 noted the Austin similarities in his private journal. That journal wasn't discovered until the 1990s, tucked away in a London archive. By then, everyone involved was long dead. Modern forensic psychologists who have studied both cases point to behavioral signatures: the way the killer approached victims, the specific nature of injuries, the cooling-off periods, all identical. FBI profilers who reviewed the cases in 2010 concluded the probability of two unrelated offenders exhibiting this precise combination of behaviors, victim selection, and methodology is extremely low. But the Austin Police Department's files from 1885, missing. The detectives' full reports, lost in that convenient fire in 1899. The physical evidence, destroyed or never properly collected in the first place. There are counter-arguments, of course. The 2.5-year gap is unusual. Most serial killers can't stop for that long. And Jack the Ripper theories number in the hundreds, everyone from Queen Victoria's physician to a mad butcher to Lewis Carroll. Maybe it's coincidence. Maybe there were just two killers separated by an ocean who happened to develop identical methods. Maybe. But here's what we know for certain. America's first serial killer walked free. He stopped killing in Austin in January 1886. And 2 years later, someone with his exact pattern, his exact rage, his exact precision started killing in London. Maybe he sailed across an ocean to reinvent himself in Whitecapel's fog. Maybe he didn't. But 8 women in Austin died the same way 5 women in Whitecapel would die 3 years later, and only Whitecapel's victims are remembered by history. The Ripper was never caught either. So if they were the same man, he won twice. Austin changed after the murders, though not in the ways that mattered most. Gaslighting was expanded citywide. The city council called it a safety measure. Really, it was a way to calm the wealthy residents who demanded action. Servant quarters were moved closer to main houses on some properties, not because the families cared about their servants' safety, but because having them closer meant better control, quicker response if something went wrong. The first civilian night watch patrols were established, armed men walking the streets after dark. They stopped plenty of black men on suspicion, harassed immigrants, made life harder for the people already suffering most. But they never caught the killer. Most of the victims' families left Austin within a year. Mollie Smith's mother moved to Houston, never spoke of her daughter again. Mary Ramey's family relocated to San Antonio, changed their name, tried to outrun the trauma. The survivors, the women who lived through the attacks, carried scars for the rest of their lives. Physical scars from axes and iron rods. Psychological scars that 1880s medicine had no name for, no treatment for, no sympathy for. There was no compensation, no victim support, no therapy, no memorial. The community of black domestic workers in Austin lived in fear for decades. Every noise in the night was the killer returning. Every stranger was a threat. The trauma passed down through generations, grandmothers who wouldn't speak of it, mothers who warned their daughters, families who remembered even when the city tried to forget. The Austin Police Department refused to officially acknowledge the serial nature of the crimes until the 1980s. For almost 100 years, they called it a series of unrelated incidents. The case files that survived were buried in archives, misfiled, forgotten. When journalists started researching the case in the 1990s, they found gaps, missing reports, destroyed evidence logs, whole weeks of investigation simply erased from the record. No official memorial existed until 2010. Jack the Ripper, by contrast, has over 1,000 books written about him, countless movies, tour in London where people pay to walk where his victims died, museums, merchandise, a cottage industry of death. The Servant Girl Annihilator was virtually unknown until researchers in the 1990s started asking questions. The crimes were identical, the brutality was the same, the only difference was who the victims were. And that decided who history remembered. Somewhere in Austin, there might still be a descendant of the killer, someone whose great-great-grandfather told strange stories about Texas, someone who wonders why Grandpa fled to England in 1886, someone who keeps a journal locked in an attic, afraid of what it might contain. They'll never know. And the families of those 8 women will never have closure. Because what happened in those servant quarters wasn't just Austin's story, it's ours. It's the story of whose pain we pay attention to and whose screams we let fade into silence. If these 8 women shook you, if their forgotten names made you angry that history chose Whitecapel over Austin, don't just move on. Subscribe so their voices don't fade back into the silence that protected their killer. And if you won't, tell us why in the comments. Maybe some stories are meant to stay buried. Maybe some victims don't deserve our memory. Or maybe, just maybe, we owe them the attention we gave their killers' English counterparts. The choice is yours. In 2010, the city of Austin finally placed a historical marker. A small bronze plaque on a quiet street corner in East Austin. No ceremony, no press coverage, just a handful of historians, a few descendants who traveled to be there, and a marker that read, "In memory of the victims of the Servant Girl murders, 1884-1885, Mollie Smith, Eliza Shelley, Irene Cross, Mary Ramey, Rebecca Ramey, Susan Hancock, Orange, Washington, Gracie Vance, 8 women, no justice, no answers, just names carved in stone, a century too late." The Austin Police Department case file is technically still open. Case number 1884-447, no active investigation, no assigned detective. Just a folder in a basement archive that no one's touched in decades. DNA testing is impossible. No preserved evidence exists. The crime scene photos that survived are grainy, useless. The physical evidence, the axes, the clothing, the blood samples, was destroyed or lost long ago. Every suspect is long dead. Every witness who might have seen something has been gone for 100 years. The case will never be solved in a legal sense. But on quiet nights in Old East Austin, some residents claim to hear footsteps in empty yards behind old Victorian homes, the sound of an axe being sharpened, a woman's scream that fades before you can place where it came from. Ghost stories, probably. Grief echoes, maybe. The way trauma seeps into places and refuses to leave. Or maybe it's the cost of letting a killer walk free, a debt that compounds across generations, a wound that never quite heals, a story that won't let itself be forgotten no matter how hard history tries. We'll never know if the Servant Girl Annihilator became Jack the Ripper. But we know this. He killed 8 women in Austin, Texas, between 1884 and 1885. He brutalized them with axes and iron rods in the dark while the city slept. He was never caught. He was never named. And for 140 years, almost no one remembered. Until now. So the next time you hear the name Jack the Ripper, remember, he might have learned his trade in Texas, on women whose names you'll never hear in a movie, on victims history decided weren't famous enough to mourn, on servants who cooked meals and washed clothes and slept alone in rooms that couldn't lock from the inside. Their names were Mollie, Eliza, Irene, Mary, Rebecca, Susan, Orange, and Gracie. And they were America's first. But if you think the Servant Girl Annihilator is the darkest forgotten crime in American history, wait until you hear about the case that came 30 years later. The one where an entire town helped hide the bodies. The one where everyone knew and no one talked. That story drops tomorrow.